Thank you for joining me on my soapbox today. Today, I'm hosting a special edition of the Soapbox Series in honor of International Women's Day, or should I say International Women's Month. For this unique installment, I'm joined by Spencer Ogden's own Associate Director, Lars Gloessner. Today, we're going to chat about how men can be allies in the workplace to help break the bias of male-dominated industries. Although the episode is short and sweet, Lars adds a lot of value by shining a light on how we can all do our part to create more gender inclusivity. Then, to flip the script on the typical soapbox series structure, he's going to ask me for my perspective on women in leadership. I hope you enjoy.
Okay, so today Lars and I are going to be talking about advocacy, inclusive mindsets, and tangible action that are needed from all. So Lars, to get started, what does being an ally mean to you?
For me, being an ally, I think starts with one really important thing, and that's to recognize that we all need to change ourselves first in order to be allies. I think there's a lot of stereotypes out there. There's a lot of unconscious bias out there. There's a lot of cultural habits out there when we talk about what is typical male and what is typical female. So I think before being an ally, the first thing is to recognize what we need to change in ourselves to be better allies or be allies at all. For me, being an ally is a couple of things. One, and that I think that's where it starts for me, is to be able and willing to listen and be able to listen to other voices and give them the room to speak and express themselves. The second point for me is to be supportive and to be encouraging of women in the workplace and in the environment that I work in and live in. The next point for me is to be a promoter and be a sponsor and champion of women in the workplace, not in always an obvious and loud way, but sometimes in a subtle and supporting and encouraging way. And then last but not least, I think is to be a mentor and be a connection and a sounding board for women in the organization and offer them support and advice and be there for them to help them with their development, their career, and to move forward in the organization. And I think those are really, for me, the most important points on how I can be an ally. But I think the important thing with that is to be conscious about that as well and make the conscious decision to wanting to be an ally and do those things. Because without that, they're not going to result in the outcomes that we want to have a more equal and more even workplace where our management teams aren't just all male. Our team leaders and managers aren't just all male, and where we have an equal balance between women and men in the organization. There's a lot of value to have different opinions, to have different viewpoints, and have different emotional profiles. I think that's part of a leadership team and a company in general as well. And so these are all of the things I think that are important for me when it comes to being an ally to women in the organization.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I think there's a lot of really valuable, even like word choices that you've made there, because I think it's really easy when we think about, promoting women in an organization that it's easy to go on the defense about, what we have done to promote diversity, especially in an organization that is more male run. I mean, we have to kind of call it what it is. So, I can say firsthand how I have appreciated your advocacy and your allyship throughout my career within Spencer Ogden. And I think you've grown a lot even in that respect, because I think everybody's initial response is, of course I'm an ally, of course I support like anyone and everyone in the business. So that first step of, like you said, just like educating yourself on maybe what you're doing that you're not even aware that you're doing through unconscious bias, and then just recognizing that in yourself and taking action to prevent it further in the future, just by um, listening to maybe how other people feel in the business, and then making some space, I think is what you said, for other types of expression in the business, which has been really valuable for me as someone who expresses myself different than you or maybe other leaders on the team, especially being one of the few women that gets to engage on a leadership level here. So I appreciate that background. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, if we flip the conversation, then, my question to you would be how men can be better allies to women and support their female colleagues better.
Yeah, this is a good question. And I think throughout my career with Spencer Ogden, I've seen this progress really dramatically, especially in the last 12, 18 months in the organization. I think just people have become much more conscientious here, and that's really important to me. And I also want to add one other layer, that I think it's really important not only for men to be allies to women, but women to be allies to each other, especially coming from a really competitive industry. It can be easy to look at someone who maybe is your competition in the business as, like you want to do better than them. But I think showing support for other women in the business is something that we should actively do, even as women. But to answer your question more specifically, I think there's a couple things that men can do to be allies to women in the business. And one is just through acknowledgement. It doesn't have to be a public display, but even just one-on-one, like calling a colleague or an associate in office or across different offices to congratulate them on a deal that they closed or saw on the deal board, or recognizing them, like, hey, I noticed you had a really great quarter or really great year, or if you hear them in the office, like in a coaching or mentorship moment, acknowledging them for witnessing that and maybe how good of a job that they did. It doesn't always have to be around their sales numbers, but just that simple, like small gesture of acknowledgement can go a really long way. And so that's one way. I think also just being empathetic. We have meetings with seniors or even just on your team. And if you notice that a female counterpart is maybe like, struggling in any way in her work or just with the topic of discussion or whatever the case may be, being empathetic rather than being judgmental in that moment. And maybe it doesn't have to be right then and there, but again, like offline, reaching out to that person and asking them how they're doing. Taking a really personal approach, I think can be really valuable for someone. And I think that's something that doesn't have to just be men to women. I think that can go both ways. But just being empathetic to maybe what that person's going through. We have a hard job. It's not rocket science, but it can be really challenging. And then finally, advocacy. We have a lot of meetings again in this organization, and recognizing, taking a moment where maybe if someone says something that you don't completely agree with or maybe comes off as sexist, it doesn't necessarily have to be called out in that moment, but taking a beat, reaching out to that person after and saying, giving them some perspective, advocating maybe for if there was a female that was a topic of discussion and explaining it from their perspective, and giving that other person the opportunity to maybe do, like Lars, what you were saying before, do some research about why maybe what they said was offensive, or maybe giving them some information about how they can educate themselves on how to be an ally in the future. And I think one step beyond that is, I think we have a really big opportunity at Spencer Ogden because we have some really strong females, either up and coming or in leadership positions, to start like a group, like a women's group of Spencer Ogden or something like that, where we can partner together and support each other better. And I think it would be really welcome to have men participate in that as well, which would be an opportunity for people to see how they can be allies. So those are some ideas that I have.
No, thanks for sharing this. And I think there's some really, really valuable points in that. And I think a lot of small and subtle things that we can all do better to be more supportive and be better allies. But I think the other point that you brought up is really important as well, that we don't just have these conversations once a year around International Women's Day, but that this is an ongoing and constant process. Yeah. I think you spoke about the change that we've seen maybe in the last, 12, 18 months or the last 2 years, but change doesn't come overnight either. And leaders need to develop, leaders need to grow, and it takes time for those people to develop and grow and move into those roles. And so I think this needs to be a constant effort if we really want to change this over the next year, 2 years, 3 years, and get women really into leadership roles at a very senior level, at my level or above my level. That will take conscious effort and continuous push, and not just a once a year kind of like type effort.
Yeah, really good point.
Well, that's it from us today, isn't it?
Yeah, I think that's good.